Well, I just heard the news today.
Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today we got an absolutely massive amount of spoilers for the new Universes Beyond Assassin's Creed set for Magic the Gathering, and I'm going to do my best to go over every single card that has dropped so far. There are a lot of them, so it's going to take a little bit. I'm going to try to quickly go through these so that we can get through them all in one video. That being said, there are even more spoilers that are continuing to drop, so there will be another video coming, but we're going to try to do, like I said, as many of them as we can in this video in particular, and just get through them all in one go. Before we get into the cards really quick, make sure you like the video if you haven't already, because it's you guys that are liking each video every time that are really helping this channel to grow so quickly, and I really have you to thank for it. So if that's you, thank you so much. Please continue to do that. I would appreciate it so much. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an upload. Tons of spoiler videos on the way. Bloomburrow spoiler season is right around the corner, and it's pretty crazy that we're getting these Assassin's Creed spoilers so close to that. And then I've got tons of crazy deck techs as well. We just did early access for Modern Horizons 3. A bunch of cool deck techs from that are up, and a bunch of new rotation-proof decks are going to be going up on the channel pretty soon as we prepare for Bloomburrow and rotation. Lots of crazy stuff happening in the world of Magic, but I'm going to stop rambling about all of that because we're here for one reason, and that's the Assassin's Creed spoilers, so let's get right to it. First up, we've got Jackdaw, 3 mana in the colors of Izzet for a 4/4 legendary artifact vehicle. It crews for 3, and whenever Jackdaw deals combat damage to a player, you may discard a card. If you do, you draw a card for each artifact you control. And that's really the key part that makes this card kind of wild, is each artifact you control. Jam this in a deck that has a bunch of artifacts, or maybe in a pirate deck that's able to make a bunch of treasures so that you have a bunch of artifacts, and now you're able to draw a ton of cards with this thing. Seems pretty wild. Next up, we've got Rest in Peace. This is another reprint. I know I get a lot of crap all the time about not knowing sometimes when a card is a reprint, so I'm just going to point this out right now. This is a reprint. Rest in Peace. 1 white and 1 for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile all graveyards, and then if a card or token will be put into a graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. So not only do you get rid of everything now, but you really shut down any graveyard synergies your opponent might have later in the game, unless they can deal with the Rest in Peace. Very cool card. Next up, we've got Distract the Guards. 2 white and 1 for a sorcery. Create 3 1/1 white human rogue creature tokens. 3 mana for 3 1/1s is pretty good. It also has free running for 1 white and 1. And what that means is you may cast this spell for its free running cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with an assassin or commander. So if you swing in and hit with an assassin or a commander, you only have to pay 2. And you get your 3 1/1s. And that seems kind of wild. I would love to use this in just the right go wide token deck, maybe a sacrifice deck, but figuring out how to cross-pollinate that synergy with Assassin Tribal, or maybe just in Commander, is pretty interesting, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Next up, we've got Chain Assassination, 2 black and 2 for an instant. Destroy target creature. If another creature died this turn, you also get to draw a card, which is pretty good. Free, cantrip kill a thing is pretty decent. 4 mana is a little rough, but it is instant speed, and the best part is it also has free running for 1 black and 1, which means if you deal damage with the with any assassin or your commander, you get to just cast it for 2 mana. So much better in Commander for sure, but again, cantripping while killing a creature for only 2 mana at instant speed is all kind of insane. Next up, we've got Aya of Alexandria. 4/3 for a legendary human assassin with menace and lifelink for 4 mana in the colors of Boros. Whenever a historic creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with menace. Now remember, historic counts anything that's an artifact, a legendary, or a saga. So you could even get like a flipped Fable of the Mirror Breaker to hit your opponent, and still get a black assassin creature out of it? Actually, that's wrong. It's no longer a saga after it flips, right? I am 99% sure it does not work. Ignore what I just said. But still, being able to generate black assassin creature tokens with Menace for hitting in with your artifact creatures, your legendary creatures, is kinda nuts. Just on a 4/3 Menace lifelinker for 4 anyway, which is just a really good body. So, super fun card for the decks that want it. Next up, we have Mary Reed and Anne Bonny. 3 mana in the colors of Izzet for a 3/3 legendary human assassin pirate. So technically it counts as an outlaw. It has haste, you can tap it to draw a card and discard a card, and whenever you discard an island, pirate, or vehicle card, create a tapped treasure token. So this is a good way of generating free treasure tokens in a deck where you have a lot of pirates and vehicles, where you're always going to be discarding something that's going to generate a treasure token for you. But the fact that it has haste and you can use it immediately is really cool. And also the fact that you don't have to discard the card to this card's ability in order to get the treasure token. Anything that discards your cards, that discards one of those things, is going to give you a treasure token, which is kind of cool. It gives you a little bit of like protection against discard in a way. If they make you discard your stuff, if they're playing a discard deck, you can generate extra mana to ramp out something really big and shove it in their face. Instead of it being stuck in your hand and then them making you discard it later on before you have a chance to play it. So really interesting strategies, I think, with a card like this, but I just like that it's pirate. You can stick it in pirate tribal. It seems really fun. Next up, we've got Ivor Wolfkist, a 7/6 legendary human assassin warrior with trample and haste for 6 mana in the colors of Naya, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you mill that many cards. You may put a saga card and or a land card from among them onto the battlefield. So what I like about this card is that it grabs a land and a saga if you happen to hit both, which is nice. It is a bit expensive, so I'm not entirely sure how competitive this card will be. That being said, it does have haste, so you get to use the ability the turn you play it, and because of the trample, they can't even just chump block it to prevent you from getting the trigger. So maybe in a Saga tribal deck where you're using stuff like Tom Bombadil, it could be kind of wild. Has extra support. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling about it. Next up, we've got Edward Kenway. This is a 5/5 legendary human assassin pirate for 5 mana in the colors of Grixis. At the beginning of your end step, you create a treasure token for each tapped assassin, pirate, and or vehicle you control. So another thing that's going to give you a bunch of treasure in the right deck. The same deck that the other thing wanted to give you treasure for being in. And whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library and then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. So even more support, specifically honing in on vehicles here, which is nice. Vehicles haven't got a lot of love lately, and I do feel like they're underutilized and have a lot of potential, so should be really fun to be able to brew with this guy in some kind of a vehicle deck. But what I like most about it is the fact that you can just play it in Assassin Tribal or Pirate Tribal and not even really have any vehicles and still get that treasure value off of it, and it might be worth it, possibly. Maybe if you're just splashing even in just a couple of really good vehicles and it's not necessarily a vehicle deck. There's a lot of potential for a card like this, so I think it's pretty cool. Next up, we have a saga. This is the Revelations of Ezio. Yes, I pronounced it right this time. All you haters, back off. 1 black and 2 for a saga. Chapter 1, destroy target tapped creature an opponent controls. So it's basically a royal assassin with haste on chapter 1, but just a 1-turn royal assassin with haste, which is pretty cool. Chapter 2, whenever an assassin you control attacks this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, which is interesting because if you play this on 3, you're not going to be able to play a creature that can then attack the next turn. So you really need your 2-drop to survive to get the value off of chapter 2, or you need to play an assassin with haste on turn 4. And so I'm curious which of those scenarios are more common, more likely to happen, and if one of those is how you should build around this card and what kind of deck you should kind of build this card into. But I digress. Chapter 3, return target assassin creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So even more value, get back a thing that's dead. If the thing that you swung with on Chapter 2 that got the counter ended up dying in combat, it gets to come back and still have the counter, which is really, really nice. It's almost like faking its death thematically. Just a really fun card. I wish this set had a limited environment so that I could play this in limited, because I think it would be really fun. Next up, we have a reprint. Yes, I actually noticed it's a reprint. This is Murder. 2 black and 1 for an instant. It murders things. Next up, we've got Desmond Miles. 1 black and 1 for a 1/3 legendary human assassin with menace. It's really cool that they actually made a card for Desmond, considering that he's the one that always went into the Animus and wasn't a part of the assassin stories in the past that were being relived in the console games. So kind of interesting. I like that they gave Desmond a card here. But a 1/3 menace for 2. It gets +1/+0 for each other assassin you control and each assassin card in your graveyard. So it's going to be really good with Go Wide Assassin Tribal, regardless of whether those assassins stick around. And whenever Desmond Miles deals combat damage to a player, you surveil X, where X is the amount of damage it dealt to that player. So the more assassins that you get out or in the graveyard, the more you get to surveil when you hit, and the more you get to dump into the graveyard, so that it's even bigger, so that you can attack for even more. It just keeps feeding itself, which is really interesting. I think for a 2-drop, this is really, really good. It's got tons of staying power. It obviously needs to be in just the right deck with an Assassin Tribal deck, but very cool card. Next up, we've got Evie Fry. 1 blue and 1 for a 2/1 legendary human assassin. It partners with Jacob Fry, which is pretty cool. That means that this creature, when this creature enters the battlefield, target player may put Jacob into their hand from their library and then shuffle. So I think that even works with Commander. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I'm pretty sure if you had Evie Fry as your commander, play it from the command zone, you just get to search up Jacob Fry from your deck and do the thing. You can also pay 1 mana and tap Evie Fry to draw a card and discard a card. When you discard a creature card this way, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So if you have a ton of creatures, if you're really, really deep into creatures specifically, you always have a creature to discard, you can just keep giving something unblockable while putting a creature in the graveyard. That kind of helps with the last card we saw, Desmond, so it might be interesting to combine those in a deck. Next up, we've got Senu, Keen-Eyed Protector, a 2/1 legendary bird scout with flying and vigilance for 1 white and 1. It's a pretty good 2-drop already. You can tap and exile Senu, Keen-Eyed Protector to gain 2 life and scry 2, which is nice if maybe you're like blocking with it, or even after an attack since it has vigilance, if you just need to find the right answer desperately enough. And then whenever a legendary creature you control attacks and isn't blocked, if Senu is exiled, put it into the onto the battlefield attacking. So when you do exile it to get 2 life and scry 2, it can just keep coming back and then keep exiling itself to do the ability again and keep coming back as long as a legendary creature gets through unblocked, which is really, really cool. And also goes really well with that last card we saw. All of these cards seem to really synergize really well with each other. Make something unblockable so that you can get back your Senu. Seems really cool. But next up, we've got Basim Ibben Ishaq. I hope I pronounced that right. I haven't played a lot of the Assassin's Creed console games, so bear with me. I played like the original back in the day, maybe 2, and a little bit of Black Flag. So, yeah, bear with me. Anyway, 2/2 legendary human assassin for 2 mana in the colors of Dimir. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Basim can't be blocked this turn. This ability triggers only once each turn. That's pretty crazy. Basically, your first historic spell every turn cantrips and makes him unblockable. He also has whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. So just a really good, aggressive play in the right deck. If you're in a legendary deck specifically with a ton of legendary creatures, that can be really good. They're going to count as historic spells. You're going to fill up the board with creatures while also drawing cards to keep filling up the board with creatures, keep making this guy unblockable, keep making him bigger and bigger. Just a really good 2-drop in a deck like that to just completely grow into a game ender for you. Next up, we've got Hookblade. 1 white and 1 for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+0, and as long as it's your turn, equipped creature has flying. And then it can equip to something else for 2 colorless mana. Pretty cool card here. It's an uncommon. I feel like it's made for limited, but like I said earlier, I don't think there's really a limited environment for this. I suppose you could go to your LGS and buy some packs and figure out a way to make limited work, but I don't think it's intended to. Let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong about that, because I'm not 100% sure. But I'm pretty sure it's just like a 100 card set, so it'd be really weird. Either way, pretty cool card. Bummed I can't use it in limited. Getting evasion on the swing. What can I say? You want it in limited. It's not really good enough for constructed, so crossing my fingers, limited might be a thing. Crossing my fingers, limited might be a thing. I'm tired, guys. Guys, I need some coffee. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. Next up, we've got the Capitolino Triad. 10 mana for a 7/7 legendary creature, God Artificer. It has Those Who Came Before, which means it costs 1 less to cast for each historic card in your graveyard. And again, historic cards are artifacts, anything legendary, and sagas. You can also exile any number of historic cards from your graveyard with total mana value 30 or greater, and then get an emblem with creatures you control have base power and toughness 9/9. I had somebody commenting on the spoiler short that I put up for this, really confused, thinking that that last ability read like a sorcery. They didn't understand. It doesn't say enters the battlefield. It doesn't say when you cast it, do this thing. They were really confused at the wording and was like, why is this worded like a sorcery? They missed the colon, right? They definitely missed the colon. That whole sentence before the colon is the cost you pay, and then the colon means everything after the colon is the ability you get. It's a normal activated ability. I understand that it's really wordy, so it might confuse some people. So if that guy is out there and watching this video, I'm sorry you misunderstood. Hopefully now you understand. I know it's wordy. It is what it is. The card's really cool. We were already talking about Legendary Tribal with some of the other cards that we went over, and this slots really perfectly into that. If you're just filling up your graveyard with tons of high-cost legendaries, it's really, really easy to get that emblem ability to go off. It's also really, really easy to cast this for, like, no mana if you just constantly are dumping legendaries in your graveyard, so I think that's a cool way to use it. But also, artifacts, right? Since artifacts count as historic cards, you can just use a go wide artifact deck, which is already really good in some of the older formats, and just kind of abuse this with artifacts as well. So there's a lot of different ways to use it. Even the sagas, even that Tom Bombadil deck I was talking about, you could use this as well because the sagas count as historic. So lots of different ways you could possibly use this. Let me know in the comments what you think the best way to use it is. I think the card is super fun. I don't know how good it is, but the potential is there for this to just be insane. Next up, we've got Bleeding Effect. 4 mana in the colors of Orzhov for an enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control gain flying until end of turn. If a creature card in your graveyard has flying, and the same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. Crazy. What I like about this card so much is that it just blanket gives it to all of your creatures. You don't have to worry about targeting a specific creature with it, your opponent killing it with removal in response, and you wish you picked something else. Like, just give everything. Just give it to everything. Play a big flyer, and they either have to deal with the flyer so that they don't get swung on and buy the flyer and lose to that flyer, but then if they deal with the flyer, now your whole board's going to get flying from the Bleeding Effect. So lots of really cool things you can do with it like that. Just like the threat of activation to make sure that anything you play that's going to end the game for you, you still get the ability to end the game. All of those traits are kind of passed on to the rest of your creatures. It really creates this inevitability that I think is pretty cool. Next up, we've got Restart Sequence, 1 black and 3 for a sorcery. It is an uncommon. Return target creature card from your graveyard directly to the battlefield, but it also has free running for 1 black and 1. This is kind of crazy because the normal cost for an effect like returning a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield is typically 5 for uncommons. So the fact that this is just 4 mana to just do the thing is kind of good in and of itself. Not amazing, but definitely like aggressively costed. The fact that you could play it for 2 mana under the right circumstances is just insane to me. I think this is probably one of the better uncommons. Granted, it wants to go in just the right deck, right? But I mean, I just think the ability to potentially cast this for just 2 mana, and even if you can't, it's still only a 4 mana spell and not a 5 mana spell, right? It's like a Zombify or whatever. Just seems really good to me. Next up, we've got Royal Assassin. I referenced Royal Assassin a little bit earlier in the video. The actual Royal Assassin is back. Of course, with new art that has to do with Assassin's Creed here. 1/1 human assassin for 2 black and 1. Can tap to destroy target tapped creature. Isn't a lot to say about this. It's a fun card. It was a staple of my play group way back in the day when I first started playing Magic, and we would play group games before Commander or Elder Dragon Highlander even existed. And we would just try to come up with different ways to play multiplayer with house rules. This guy was constantly on the battlefield. Ciliana, I'm looking at you because you were the one that used this the most. And I died to it a lot. So, good to see Royal Assassin back. Love it. Next up, we've got Raven Clan War Axe. 3 mana for an artifact equipment in the colors of Boros. When Raven Clan War Axe enters the battlefield, you may search your library and or graveyard for a card named Ivor Battle Ready, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, you have to shuffle. It equips for 2, and then an equipped creature gets +2/+0 and trample. So the fact that this can just search out Ivor is pretty cool. Obviously, you're not going to want to use it in a deck where Ivor is your commander because you lose that part of the ability. But it also triggers anytime you enter the battlefield. So if you're playing this in a normal 60 card constructed format, and granted, I don't know how good this would be in the older 60 card constructed formats, but if you are and you have multiple copies of Ivor, it's possible you could like flicker this and do things like that to fetch another copy of Ivor if the first one dies, which is kind of cool. That being said, I don't know how competitive this card is. It seems kind of slow, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think this is worth playing. Next up, we've got Escarpment Fortress. Escarpment Fortress, I suppose. If anyone knows what the heck escarpment means, let me know in the comments below, because I feel like a dummy right now. 1 white and 4 for a 3/5 wall with Defender and Reach. Man, it's been a hot minute since we've seen a wall, right? Other creatures you control get +1/+0, so it's a wall that's an Anthem. And whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, you get to draw a card. This is like the best wall ever. You're drawing cards in an aggro deck. You're buffing up your whole team. And then you have this thing that can sit back and block all day so that you can win races. Just seems really good to me. Next up, we've got Surtur, Fiery Jotun. This is a 5/5 legendary giant god warrior with trample for 5 mana in the colors of just red. 2 red and 3. Whenever you cast a historic spell, Surtur Fiery Jotun deals 3 damage to any target. So you get a free lightning bolt every single time you cast an artifact, a legendary, or a saga. That seems pretty good stapled to your 5/5 trample for 5, which is already not awful, right? This guy seems really good. Do we use him in giant tribal, warrior tribal, nothing tribal, just good red decks? I don't know. I don't know where this guy belongs. He is legendary, so maybe the legendary deck. Let me know in the comments if you've got ideas about that. But the ability seems cool. It might be a little bit overcosted, not 100% sure, but it does seem like a really good card. Next up, we've got Achilles Davenport, a 3/3 legendary human assassin for 4 mana in the colors of Dimir. It has free running for just 2 mana, 1 black and 1 blue. So getting your 3/3 for 2 mana if you swung with an assassin or your commander that turn and dealt combat damage seems really good. It also has menace, and it's a lord. It gives other assassins you control +1/+1. I really feel like this is kind of the backbone of the assassin tribal deck. This just seems nuts. Getting your 3/3 menace lord down for just 2 mana in a deck that's going to be swinging in with assassins and probably getting in. A lot of the assassins have evasion abilities, whether it be menace or death touch, where the opponent doesn't really want to block it, stuff like that. So I think this card is a little bit better than it looks, because I think that free running is going to be used a little more often than it seems like it might on the surface, just because of, like I said, those evasive abilities that assassins in particular tend to have. I think it's one of the tribes that has a better chance of something like this happening, something like being able to activate a free running ability because you got through for damage. But let's move on. Next up, we've got Auditor Ambush. This is a sorcery for 4 mana in the colors of Dimir. You choose one or both. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Target player searches their library and or graveyard for a card named Ezio, Blade of Vengeance. Nailed it again. Reveals it and puts it into their hand. If they search their library this way, they shuffle. So it's a 4 mana thing that acts as temporary removal for a creature and also fetches you your Ezio. That actually seems kind of good. You can even grab it if it already died out of the graveyard. So you don't have to really worry about it whiffing too often unless all of your copies have been exiled, which is nice. And usually the problem with cards like this that tutor up stuff for this much mana is you can't really take a turn off to do the tutoring. So the fact that this doesn't really take the turn off, this allows you to impact the board and kind of stall your opponent out. Delay their best creature from hitting in on you, making them have to recast it and all that good stuff, while still fetching out the card that you want, I think is pretty decent. It's still a little expensive, so the jury's out on whether it's actually worth playing, but that first ability definitely makes it much more reasonable to consider. Next up, we've got Rooftop Bypass, another enchantment for 3 mana in the colors of Dimir. Whenever one or more non-token creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you just make a 1/1 black assassin creature token with menace. That seems pretty good. The only thing I don't love about this is it's 1 or more, so you can only get 1 a turn at most, which doesn't seem like a lot for a rare. Honestly, a 3 mana rare feels like it should do more than this. If it could trigger once for each creature that dealt combat, it might be a little bit better. Although, I guess the thing that's being overlooked, if you look at it at just the value you get when you first drop it, it seems kind of meh. But the thing I think that's overlooked the most is the fact that as those tokens start to build up, they contribute to the damage. And since they have menace, they're hard to block. So if you have, 3 1/1 menace creatures from 3 triggers of Rooftop Bypass, it's way, way easier to get in and make sure you hit and get another menace creature. And that might help make up for this seeming a little slow, but I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments. It just seems really slow to me. Next up, we've got Origin of the Hidden Ones. This is another saga. 1 red and 3. On chapter 1, Origin of the Hidden Ones deals 4 damage to any target. So it's a really expensive removal spell on chapter 1. But it does double as damage to the face to close out the game if you need it to, which is really cool. If you top deck 1 later in the game, you could just end the game with it. So even though it's a little expensive for that, I like that versatility there. And then on chapter 2, you get not 1 but 2 black assassin creature tokens with menace. And that's where you start to really get your mana's worth out of this card. And then on chapter 3, whenever an assassin you control attacks this turn, you create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with menace that's tapped and attacking. So not only do you get 2 on chapter 2, but you get an extra 1 for every single one that attacks on chapter 3. That actually seems really good. So once you get to the end of chapter 3 and get all the value out of this card, it's actually kind of wacky. And if you draw it later in the game where it's kind of too late to get all of the value, it makes up for that by just helping you close out the game so that it doesn't matter that you don't get all the value, and it just goes 4 damage to the opponent's face. So either way, I think it's pretty good. I think that helps make up for one of the weaknesses a card like this would have, like top decking it later in the game. So I think it's pretty good. I like it. But then again, sagas are my favorite card type, so I'm probably going to like all of them. Next up, we've got Become Anonymous. This is an instant for 2 blue and 2. Exile target non-token creature you own and the top 2 cards of your library in a face-down pile. Shuffle that pile and then cloak those cards. They enter the battlefield tapped. Very, very cool card here. Not only do you get 2 other creatures onto the field, but you also get to hide one of your creatures. And remember, if something's cloaked, it's going to have ward. So you could do this in response to removal to not only protect it, but then give it ward so that maybe they can't even cast another removal spell on it. And then you can just flip your creature back up at any time by paying its casting cost, because that's how cloak works. So being able to instant speed, sort of save your dude, get 2 other dudes, have them all have ward 2, and then have them all have the ability to turn face up if they're creatures, can be a ton of value if you use it right. This is definitely a card that rewards being patient and clever play. So I kind of love it. Very, very cool card. Next up, we've got Eagle Vision. 1 blue and 4 for a sorcery. You draw 3 cards, but it has free running for 1 blue and 1. So if you smack them with an assassin or your commander, you can draw 3 cards for 2 mana, and that is insane. This card could be insane. Granted, you do need to smack them, so will it be worth playing? Not in every deck. Not in every deck. But if you're deep enough into assassins, or if you're the kind of deck that's playing your commander constantly and swinging with your commander constantly, and it's cheap enough you can just keep replaying it if they remove it, then the value of a card like this goes way up. Next up, we've got Petty Larceny. 1 black and 3 for a sorcery. Look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library and exile those cards face down. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast them. You also create a treasure token. Pretty interesting. 4 mana to get 2 cards and a treasure token is kind of okay to begin with. It reminds me of that one red spell I can't remember the name of right now, where you discard 1 card and draw 2 and make 2 treasure tokens for 4 mana. This is 1 less treasure token, but you don't have to discard a card. But you get their cards, not yours. What really makes this card great, of course, is the free running ability. You can do all of that for just 2 mana if you smack them with an assassin or your commander. These free running cards are kind of insane. Like, if there is a deck where you can consistently get those free running costs, the value, the efficiency is going to be through the roof. Somebody's got to make that deck. Somebody's just got to make it. Free running seems like it's just ripe for being busted. Next up, we've got Apple of Eden, Isu Relic. This is a 4 mana legendary artifact. You can tap it, pay 4 life, and sack it to look at target opponent's hand, exile those cards face down. You may play those cards this turn, and mana of any type can be spent to cast them. Until end of turn, whenever you play a land or cast a spell this way, its owner draws a card. At the beginning of the next end step, you return the exiled cards, and you can only activate the ability as a sorcery. This card seems kinda on the surface, but there's a lot of cool ways you can use it. If you have a 3 mana Narset on the battlefield where they can't draw extra cards, now you can just play their whole hand and they don't get extra cards to replace the things you play, which is awesome. If you're up against a discard deck, right, you can use their discard cards to make them discard the things that they're drawing when you play their spells, which is kind of cool. You can also just use this during your opponent's upkeep to exile their hand so that they just basically lose a turn. They have nothing to play. And then just not even play any of the cards. Just make them lose a turn. They don't draw any cards, and they don't get the cards back until their turn's over. Maybe some combination of all of those abilities would be interesting, but there's definitely ways to use this that are overlooked that are really cool, so I'm glad it exists. That being said, I don't know if it's worth the hoops to jump through, but it does seem pretty fun. Next up, we've got Sword of Light and Shadow. Yes, this is a reprint. Can already hear the people commenting. Yes, it's a reprint. I know this one's a reprint. I don't always know the reprints. This is 3 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 protection from white and from black. It equips for 2, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you gain 3 life and may return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Next up, we've got Caduceus Staff of Hermes. 1 white and 2 for a legendary artifact equipment. Gives the equipped creature lifelink and equips for 2 white mana. Also, as long as you have 30 or more life, equipped creature gets +5/+5 and indestructible, and prevent all damage that would be dealt to this creature. That's crazy, man. It's like super indestructible. Not only is it indestructible, but if you're up against creatures with like Wither and stuff, you don't even have to worry about, you know, still dying to -1/-1 counters or whatever, because the damage that would be converted to Wither just gets prevented. This card's just bananas. I kind of love it. Obviously, you're not going to use it unless it's in a deck that has a ton of life gain. In those decks, it's super easy to get to 30. So this is just like, make your best creature absolutely insane, and then if they kill it, make your next best creature absolutely insane, over and over and over again. Yeah, I just think it's really good in those decks. It is slow, so maybe it's not as good as I'm thinking, and it's definitely only really good in very, very deep in life gain decks, but very cool card. Next up, we've got Layla Hassan. 1 white and 3 for a 3/4 legendary human assassin with first strike. When Layla Hassan enters the battlefield, and whenever 1 or more assassins you control deal combat damage to a player, you return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. So, pretty cool card. Automatic card advantage as long as you have a historic card in your graveyard, which we've seen a bunch of cards already in this video that are trying to put historic cards in your graveyard. So it could synergize decently well with those. And then it just gives you automatic value when you play it, and then maybe gives you more value later on. Pretty cool. Next up, we've got Sean and Rebecca Agents. Not agents of anything, just agents. 4/4 legendary human assassin scientist with vigilance for 4 mana in the colors of Bant. When Sean and Rebecca Agents enters the battlefield, search your graveyard, hand, and library for a card named the Animus and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. You can also tap Sean and Rebecca Agents for 1 colorless mana, and when you do, you mill 2 cards. This does a lot. I think the fact that it finds the Animus and puts it right onto the battlefield for free is what really pushes this card over the top, because it's a pretty decent body in and of itself as a 4/4 vigilance for 4 that can like swing and block and give you a little bit of mana and mill you. Just kind of gives you a lot of versatile value overall. So the fact that it grabs the Animus, just sticks it into play for free is just really, really good extra value, and absolutely like takes this card to a next level. So I think it's pretty cool. Next up, we've got Abstergo Entertainment. This is a legendary land that can tap for a colorless mana. You can also pay 1 and tap it to add a mana of any color, so it's a filter land. You can also pay 3, tap it and exile it to return up to 1 target historic card from your graveyard to your hand, and then exile all graveyards. Really, really cool, especially if you're up against a deck that's trying to utilize their graveyard. You have this incidental way of just getting rid of their graveyard and really hurting them while also getting card advantage and getting like your best historic card back. I think that's pretty cool. And the fact that it's fixing you on the way is negligible, but it's nice. Next up, we've got Templar Knight. 1 white and 1 for a 3/1 human knight with vigilance. You can pay 1 white and tap 5 untapped attacking creatures you control named Templar Knight to search your library for a legendary artifact, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. And a deck can have any number of cards named Templar Knight. I kind of like the thematics, the thematic tone to these cards. The fact that you just want a whole bunch of them because they're expendable Templar Knights, and they're going on their crusade to find their legendary artifact. And Even if they all die along the way, you don't care. They still do the thing, right? They're expendable. It seems pretty cool because you get 5 onto the field. You're swinging with them all with Vigilance. And because they have Vigilance, you're tapping them all to the ability after they swing. So even if they die in combat, you still activated the ability. And, you know, then your opponent blocks and kills them in combat. So you lose a bunch of them in the process. So it's, you know, expendable Templar Knights. Just go out and find the legendary artifact at any cost, even with your lives. Seems like a really cool, on-point flavor, and I like it. Next up, we've got 𝐀𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬, 4 mana in the colors of Azorius for a 3/3 legendary human knight with protection from assassins. Very cool. Other knights you control get +2/+2 and have protection from assassins. I think this is the first like anti-assassin card we've seen. Really interesting. When 𝐀𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 enters the battlefield, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls until 𝐀𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 leaves the battlefield. So it's like a brutal Cathar, Skyclave Apparition style card for an extra mana. But that extra mana means he's a 3/3 with protection from assassins that gives all of your knights +2/+2 and protection from assassins. That's a lot of value. I'll take it. Card's awesome. Knight Tribal would be so fun against all of these assassins. Next up, we've got Socrates, or as Bill and Ted would say, Socrates, Athenian Teacher, a 0/4 legendary human advisor for 3 mana in the colors of Azorius. It has Defender. It has hexproof as long as it's untapped, and it has Socratic Dialogue, which means until end of turn, you can tap it, and then until end of turn, target creature gains if this creature would deal combat damage to a player. Prevent that damage, this creature's controller and that player each draw half that many cards, rounded down. So pretty interesting. It's symmetrical, right? You both draw cards equal to half the damage of the creature that the creature dealt, and you deal no damage. Not super good in one-on-one, but this is the kind of card that's definitely aimed at Commander. You can use it to sort of swing at the guy you want to help, and you both get to draw a bunch of cards, and have a better chance against the other players at the table. Kind of interesting. A very good political tool in games like that, for sure. And then the fact that it has hexproof up until it uses the ability is also kind of cool. It kind of protects itself, makes sure it gets to activate its ability at least once. Very cool card for Socrates here. Next up, we've got Sigurd, Jarl of Ravensthorpe. This is a 3/3 legendary human warrior for 3 mana in the colors of Naya, with Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink. That's already a lot for a 3-drop. It also has Boast for just one colorless mana. Put a lore counter on target saga you control, or remove 1 from it. So it's another card that's kind of made for Saga Tribal, although I'd argue the body's good enough that it probably just works in a deck that isn't necessarily Saga Tribal. Just as a reminder, the way Boast works is you can only activate a Boast ability if the creature attacked this turn, and you can only activate any one given Boast ability once in a turn. Also, whenever you put a lore counter on a saga you control, you put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 other target creature. So this is just a really good body that's even more insane if you have enough sagas to support it. You can just overwhelm your saga value very quickly. You can just roll right through all of the chapters with repeated hits from Sigurd here. Keep buffing up whatever creatures you need to in the process, and just have a 3/3 Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink for 3. Just seems like a lot. I love it. It also probably fits in the Legendary Matters deck. A lot of cross-pollinating synergies in this set, and I think it's really cool. Next up, we've got Brotherhood Headquarters. This is a land that taps for 1 colorless mana. It is an uncommon. Can also tap for a mana of any color, but you can spend this mana only to cast an assassin spell, or a spell that has free running, or to activate an ability of an assassin source. So obviously meant for assassin tribal. What I really like about this, and what's easy to overlook, the mana does not have to be spent on a free running ability. It just can only be spent on a spell that has free running. So even if you're casting your free running spells for their normal mana cost, their hard casted cost, and not using the free running ability to play them, you can still tap this for a mana of any color to play for that spell, to pay for that spell, which means you can really go deep into, you know, tribal and tribal lands and still have the mana you need for spells, which sometimes tribal decks have a tough time doing. And I think that's really cool. Next up, we've got Ezio, Brash Novice. I think this is supposed to be Ezio when he was younger, before he completely became an assassin, right? He's not even an assassin creature type here. This is a 1/1 legendary human for 2 mana in the colors of Boros. It's actually a hybrid mana, so it can be a mono white or mono red if you want. Whenever Ezio Brash Novice attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on him, and as long as Ezio has 2 or more counters on him, any counters, doesn't have to be the +1/+1 counters, it gets first strike and is an assassin in addition to its other types. So it keeps growing, eventually becomes an assassin with first strike. Really good for a 2-drop, honestly. It's really cool that you can play this in a deck without red or without white because of the hybrid cost. And there's so many more options for what this could slot into because of that, whether it be like Orzhov or Rakdos or whatever you might want to pop it in. Just a really cool 2-drop that grows over time, which kind of makes sense thematically. Next up, we've got Adawal. I think I pronounced that right. Let me know in the Let me know in the comments. Man, I need more coffee. I should have taken a coffee break. But ain't nobody got time for that. We got to get through these cards. Adawale, Breaker of Chains. A 4/1 legendary human assassin pirate for 3 mana in the colors of Dimir. When he enters the battlefield, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. Put an assassin, pirate, or vehicle card from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, you may return Adawale from your graveyard to your hand. Very, very cool. Just a ton of value here. You get to dig for what you need, and then what you need, if it then connects, can get back Adawale. If your opponent dealt with Adawale, it can become kind of a cycle, which is really, really cool. Yeah, just a really interesting card. Next up, we've got Lydia Fry. This is a 3/2 legendary human assassin in the colors of Dimir. It is a Dimir hybrid mana, so it can go mono black or mono blue. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater, which is pretty cool. And at the beginning of your end step, you surveil X, where X is the number of tapped assassins you control. So this kind of feeds into the synergies we saw where you want legendary creatures or assassins in the graveyard for some of the other cards we saw. This can kind of help that with the surveil. And the more assassins you get out on the field, the more you can surveil, which seems pretty interesting. And it's easy for this to kind of get through, easier for this to get through for damage than your average creature because of that first ability too, which is nice gravy. Next up, we've got Bayek of Siwa. Pretty sure I pronounced that one right. 5 mana in the colors of Boros for a 3/4 double striking legendary human assassin. Yup. As long as it's your turn, other historic creatures you control have double strike. That's crazy. Just all your legendary creatures, all of your artifact creatures, they all have double strike on your turn, and Bayek gives himself double strike, but he's also got Disguise. So you can just smash him down for 3 colorless as a 2/2 ward 2 creature, and then some point later in the game when you're swinging in with a bunch of your creatures and your opponent thinks they have their perfect blocks figured out, you just flip them up for 3 mana, and now they've all got double strike, and you just blow your opponent out. That seems really fun. You could also just do that on the block. Seems like a really good card if you're in the right deck that's just going as wide as possible, as quick as possible. Next up, we've got... oh god. Somebody correct me in the comments. I am not going to pronounce this correctly. Ratana Haketon. I'm going to say Ratana Haketon. That's wrong. 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary human assassin in the colors of Esper, as long as Rattata hasn't dealt damage yet. It has hexproof and can't be blocked. Pretty cool. It's just hexproof and unblockable until it deals damage. no matter how many turns that takes, which is kind of awesome. Whenever Ratatouille deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with menace, and when you do, return target equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield and attach it to that token. Man, this thing just keeps having value, right? I was like, oh, it's making menace 1/1 menace assassins like a lot of the other cards we saw. That's cool. Oh wait, you get an equipment back for free too, and attach it for free. Like, sure. Ratatouille is a good card if you can work all of the synergies at once. Next up, Cathartic Reunion. This is also another reprint. Look, I'm smart. 1 red and 1 for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, discard 2 cards, and then draw 3. We have done good. Next up, we've got Roshan, Hidden Magister. 1 black and 3 for a 4/4 legendary human assassin. Other creatures you control are assassins in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Face down creatures you control have menace, and whenever a permanent you control is turned face up, you draw a card and lose a life. Man, all of these cards have so much text. So much text. Everything's an assassin. Everything's gonna trigger your assassin synergies. Yeah, give everything menace, draw cards, do all the stuff. It's just, it's really good for an uncommon. I don't know if it's good enough. I don't know if it's good enough to be a rare. That's why it's an uncommon. I'm tired. Next up, we've got Shay Cormac. This is a 1/1 legendary human knight rogue for 2 mana in the colors of Orzhov. You can pay 1 colorless to give permanents your opponent's control, make permanents your opponent's control lose hexproof, indestructible, protection, shroud, and ward until end of turn. It doesn't target or anything, so you have no problems just making them lose all of their protection abilities, which is kind of awesome. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability you control, put a bounty counter on that creature. And whenever a creature with a bounty counter on it dies, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Shay Cormac. So this is just the ultimate removal lord. This is just like, no, all of my removal will work on everything, and you can't do anything about it. Basically, each removal spell you play just costs an extra mana in order to remove things it normally couldn't remove. Actually, it's not even that, because you pay the mana once, and however many removal spells you want to cast that turn and kill things, you can. You don't have to pay the extra mana every single time you cast a spell, which makes it even better. And then you just get bounty counters, and Shay just gets bigger. You're killing things with bounty counters. Man, this card is super fun. This is the kind of card I would love to build around. Seems perfect for Commander. I know it's just an uncommon, but I kind of love this. If there was any card I would sort of want to build around in Commander, I think it would be this. Just run Shay and a crazy amount of removal, and just go completely ham. Just keep, Shay is cheap. You could just keep replaying him from the command zone. I love it. Next up, we've got the Spear of Leonidas, 1 red and 2 for a legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you choose 1. Bull Rush, it gains double strike until end of turn. Summon, you create Phobos, a legendary 3/2 red horse creature token. Or Revelation, discard 2 cards and then draw 2 cards. And it equips for just 2 mana. Pretty cool. It's a bit expensive. It's going to cost a total of 5 mana before you get to trigger it. It doesn't give you any buffs at all, just the abilities. That being said, getting a free 3/2 the first time you swing is nice. Getting double strike on consecutive turns is really nice. And then having the ability to discard some stuff to draw other stuff if you're in a pinch and need to find an answer is kind of cool gravy too. I still think it's a little bit overcosted, but very fun card. Next up, we've got Conspiracy, which I'm almost positive is a reprint. I'm 99% sure this is a reprint. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I know you're going to anyway. This is 2 black and 3 for an enchantment. As Conspiracy enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control are the chosen type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Cool. Everything's an assassin, or everything's a knight, or everything's whatever you need it to be. This is definitely a reprint. I've seen this card before. But thematically, it is a really cool reprint, and I do like the art. It fits in really well. So, pretty cool. Next up, we've got Cassandra, Eagle Bearer. This is a 2/2 legendary human assassin warrior for 3 mana in the colors of Boros. It has haste, and when it enters the battlefield, you search your graveyard, hand, and library for a card named the Spear of Leonidas and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. And whenever a creature you control with a legendary equipment attached to it deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Okay, now it makes a lot more sense. The Spear of Leonidas makes a lot more sense. By itself, it's kind of eh. But if you're just fetching it for free with Cassandra, that's different. That is very much different. You're paying 3 mana for a 2/2 haste that lets you draw a card every time it swings when it's equipped, and you get the spear for free. So for an extra 2 mana, it is equipped, and you're swinging, and you're drawing a card, and you're activating one of the abilities of the spear. And then if they kill Cassandra, you can start putting the spear on something else. That's what makes it good. If you get Cassandra and the spear as a package deal for 3 mana, then the spear is good. Obviously, you top deck the spear and you don't have Cassandra, you're really, really, really sad. But this card makes the spear good finally. Next up, we've got Viewpoint Synchronization. 1 green and 4 for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them, put 2 of them onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into your hand, and then shuffle. So it's kind of like a super hero. You don't need to sack a land, which is nice. It's got free running for 1 green and 2. For the same price as like a Harrow or similar cards, if you manage to connect with an assassin or your commander, you get to still play this and just get an extra land, which is kind of nuts. Yeah, again, free running cards are nuts if you're in the right deck where you can consistently play them for their free running cost. Next up, we've got Hunter's Bow. 1 green and 1 for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. That creature deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature you don't control. Equipped creature has Reach and Ward 2, and it equips for just 1 mana. I think this is really good. The fact that it equips for free when you play it, and then even if the thing it's equipped to dies, you can just re-equip it for only 1 mana, is pretty good. You can give Reach and Ward 2, so it's hard for them to remove the thing, and you can block flyers, and you just get to fight something. It's basically a fight spell that leaves behind more value than a typical fight spell would. Actually, it's even better than a fight spell, right? Because it's a bite spell. You just deal the damage, they don't deal damage back. So yeah, I think this is just awesome. One of the better bite spells I think we've ever seen. Just because of the value it leaves behind and how cheap it is to re-equip to something if you need to. I like this card. Next up, we've got Mjolnir, Stormhammer. This is a legendary artifact equipment for 4 colorless mana. When it enters the battlefield, you get to attach it to target legendary creature you control. Makes sense. Like, you know, Thor or whatnot. It equips for 4 mana otherwise, and whenever equipped creature attacks, you tap target creature defending player controls and put a stun counter on it. Then Mjolnir deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of tapped creatures that opponent controls. That's a lot, honestly. So for 4 mana, you're going to get an activation that turn. For 4 mana, you basically get to tap something down, put a stun counter on it, and deal at least 1 damage to the opponent. More if they swung last turn and have a bunch of tapped creatures. But you also remove a blocker out of the way so that you can connect with the thing that this is equipped to. And then if you have other tap support, other stun counter support, where you can tap more things down, stun more things, you can just start doing crazy damage on swinging. A lot of different ways you can utilize this card. It is a little bit expensive, so I don't know if it's competitive. But thematically, again, it's the flavor's spot on, and it's a really interesting card for sure. Next up, we've got Temporal Trespass. Yes, I know, this is a reprint. I didn't know this earlier today. I put it up as a spoiler short, and once again got called out in the comments for not knowing it was a reprint. But honestly, guys, I've been playing this game for 30 years, but I've taken breaks here and there. So a lot of the cards that have come out in those breaks, I don't really know. I don't play a lot of older formats. I play a lot of standard and limited. I mess around with, you know, Commander once in a while, but it's very casual. So yeah, I didn't know this was a reprint. Now I know it's a reprint. Either way, I think it's busted. 3 blue and 8 for a sorcery. It has Delve, so you can reduce the cost by 1 for each card you exile from your graveyard. And you just take an extra turn after this one, and then exile the Temporal Trespass. So you can basically play this as a Time Walk for just 1 more mana than Time Walk if you have 8 things to exile with the Delve ability. And I just feel like that's really good. But like I said, I've never played with this card before. I didn't know it existed until today. So I'm curious if you guys have any history with the card. How good is this card? Did it see a lot of play at any point in time? Does it still see a lot of play? I'm just really curious if when this was first released, if it really like set the world on fire. Because I feel like I would have heard of it by now if it did. I don't know. But the card's super powerful in my opinion. I think it's crazy. Next up, we've got the last card today. This is Staff of Eden Vault's Key. 6 mana for a legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you put target legendary permanent card not named Staff of Eden Vault's Key from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And then you can tap it to draw a card for each permanent you control but don't own. I think this thing is subtly powerful in a lot of different ways. Obviously, just getting the best legendary permanent from either graveyard for 6 mana is pretty good. And then you can immediately tap it to draw at least 1 card if you took a creature from them. So a little bit of value baked in is nice. But I think where this gets really crazy is if you're in some kind of a deck that's stealing other stuff from the opponent as well, if you're built into that theme, you can start to really exponentially increase the amount of cards that you can draw by tapping this. And that alone isn't enough to really push this card over the edge, because that's kind of like a lot of hoops to jump through. But what I do think makes this kind of crazy is the idea that you can flicker it, because the first ability triggers on entering the battlefield. So if you flicker it, you get to steal something else every single time you flicker it. That gets pretty wild. And then the flicker concept is supported even deeper by the tap ability, because you can tap to draw a card for each permanent you control but don't own, then flicker it, steal something else, it comes back onto the battlefield untapped, you get to tap it again and draw even more cards. You get to tap it twice to draw cards in 1 turn, and the second time, you're probably drawing 1 more card than you drew the first time. That just seems like an insane amount of value. Just constantly flicker it, steal a ton of stuff, draw a ton of cards, so that you have more ways to flicker it. Really good against legendary decks, that's for sure. Even outside of legendary decks, right? You can get your own stuff back from the graveyard by flickering it and still draw a bunch of cards if you have other ways of stealing your opponent's stuff, even if they're not legendaries. So a lot of versatility in how you can use this. But I really think the flicker thing is the key to really just turning this thing up to 11 and getting the absolute most out of it. And that's it. That's the last card today. Thank God. It took us forever to get through everything. There was just so many cards. I will have another video coming with the next batch of spoilers as soon as they're released, so make sure you keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, Bloomburrow spoiler season is right around the corner, and I am going to hit the ground running with that set. I'm going to have things up so quick. Going to cover all of the spoilers in depth. It's going to be wild. I can't wait for that set, specifically because rotation is happening. Finally, I need rotation. I love Brewing Standard, but I can't stand this 3-year standard, and I want rotation so badly, more than I've ever wanted it in my life, which is saying a lot. Plus, the Bloomburrow set's going to be really fun. Red Wall themed anthropomorphic animals. So lots of crazy spoiler content coming with that. Got lots of crazy deck techs. I've got deck techs up right now from early access for Modern Horizons 3. And more stuff on the way that's going to be post-rotation, you know, like rotation-proof standard brews, which should be really fun. So that people have things that they can play and rank up on the ladder without having to blow a bunch of wild cards on things that are going to rotate. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, but especially the Bloomburrow spoilers, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you don't miss any of my videos coming, because there's a ton of stuff on the way. And if you've stuck it out all the way to the end here, please hit that like button. It helps me out so much. It makes sure that this video gets out to that many more people every single time just one person even likes it. And it's because of you guys liking the video that the channel's growing so quickly. So thank you so much for doing that. It means the world to me. I'll see you soon for another spoiler video. Until then. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there, and if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.